Якщо будуть питання іноземною мовою, потрібен буде переклад, позаду вас лежать приймачі. Наперед.
Зараз пару хвилинок переписують просто презентацію.
Вона така велика, на 5 гігабайт, напевно.
Не знаю. І просто клікер дадуть.
А як ми їх будемо розбирати?
Ну, можна це, вони її тут будуть бачити, а можна буде отак.
Просто їх кілька. Ну, мається на увазі, що
Ми зібрали.
все разом?
Так.
Воно має таке як окремо? Окей. Так.
Перші там 5 хвилин. Це потім по презентаціях готувалися?
Можна по презентаціях, може, в принципі. Перше питання таке. Розкажіть особисто ви, які тренди, що вас найбільше вразило і куди ми рухаємося. Так, я буду стежити за тим, що я буду, якщо щось там доуточнювати. Як ви всі провели вчорашній день?
Цікаво.
А я завжди. Когось він не закінчився, наприклад, як у мене. Мене до сих пір ні світла, ні води.
Це де?
Не Святоша.
Святоша.
Я намагався знайти пункт незламності, значить тільки позначено.
Ви з презентацією, правильно?
Це пункт.
Да. Я висунувся. Я дам пульт презентації, коли ви почнете говорити, ми будемо відкривати під вас. Це листається ось презентація, це ваша, правильно, наскільки?
Діма, презентація на екрані.
Бачу. Ось, можете подивитися, да? Це ж ваша
Ну
презентація.
так, це моя, тільки я не думаю, що вона буде збігатися.
Нічого страшного, в
Ну,
принципі.
просто, щоб ви бачили, листаєте.
Вважаєте за потрібне, гортаємо, не вважаєте, не гортаємо.
Да.
Добре?
Ми її автоматично включимо, а ви гортаєте. Туди, все вперед, все назад, інше не
Я
читайте.
погано ще видно, що там. Навіть я взагалі не буду навіть звертати увагу.
Не робити презентацію?
Може не потрібно.
Окей, вашу презентацію ви
Чи
зробили.
може мені щось?
Ні, ну я свою знаю, я просто там...
Ми її
гляну,
автоматично.
да.
Ось ваша презентація,
Окей.
правильно? Угу. Да, ось.
Можете залишити для нас.
Ні, ми, коли ви будете виступати.
Окей.
Звичайно. Окей, це ж перше, так?
Все, заводь.
Залишимо.
Але Кличко сказав, що 25% ми теж попитали по співробітниках з різних кінців Києва. Це дуже дивні 25%, це питання до соціології. Яким чином Кличко вирахував, що 25% тільки лишилося без світла?
Соціологія має до фантазії Кличка.
Тому що соціологія – це наука точних цифр.
Це швидше до психіатрії.
Це залежить, яку вибірку він зробив. Якщо він запитав всіх своїх знайомих, можливо, у нього по районах є світло.
2020 осіб.
Ні, ну чого.
Та може, колись Тимошенко своїх колег.
Вона малювала перемогу 40% собі.
Так.
І головне, що вона спиралася потім на ці результати.
Так, а потім народ стібався, що навіть серед прихильників Тимошенка тільки там 38% готові голосувати за Тимошенка. Це стьоп був на весь
5 секундок.
Today is 24th of November and straight 9 months from the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine. Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform continues its operation. My name is Vasil Samokhvalov and we will talk about the subject of change of Ukrainian society during the war. We will talk about it with the people who know exactly the answer to this question. They are sociologists or representatives of sociological companies. Let's start with introduction. So, Mykhailo Mishchenko is Deputy Director of the Razumkov Center Sociological Service. Mr. Pavlo Fedorchenko-Kutuev, PhD in Sociology, Head of the Sociology Department at Igor, Sikorsky, Kyiv Polytechnic Institute. Lubomyr, Mysiv, Deputy Director of the Sociological Group Rating. and Mr. Andriy Eremenko, founder of the research company Active Group. My apologies. I just read it in the order different than it's written. So let's give 5 minutes for introduction to each of you. The question is simple and complicated at the same time. How has the Ukrainian society changed, and what are the trends that impressed you, and where are we going? We have microphones, you can pass to each other. Which way do we start? Left to right or right to left? Well, it doesn't really matter. We were just trying to identify the leader function, who takes the leader function. Do I have to press anything? No, not really. Thank you for invitation. Can you please talk closer to the microphone? Thank you for invitation and for this relevant initiative, appropriate initiative to talk about this subject, but I would like to specify polemically that sociologists don't claim to be omniscient, and that they have some absolute knowledge. We try to get involved in the process of cognition. There are representatives of sociological companies, so-called pollsters, who work with public opinion polls, who have most recent data, and me as the representative of sociological sector, we work with the empiric data, we analyze it, and we try to integrate it into a conceptual system of coordinates. And this is what I would like to talk about, what I've been impressed with my background. I belong to historic sociology, which describes, as one of the founders said, the big structures and big processes. And among the phenomena in this historic philosophy, we review the institution of the state, and even in American sociology, there was an interesting movement which generated interest in development about how the state can influence the initiation of successful development and modernization. There was analysis of so-called Asian tigers, first Japan and then subsequently the tigers. Within the last decades, there was some fandomship about the success of China, and these ideas were reviewed on the background of what's happening in Ukraine and former USSR, and there was a consensus, or, well, maybe not consensus, but widespread thought of the sociologists and political scientists, both American and European, and it was about Ukraine, not as a failed state, but being far from the state in the institutional sense, with the politicians and the capacities that were observed, for example, in Japan, and then during 60s, 70s, and 80s, in the examples of South Korea and Thailand, and in 90s and 2000s on the example of China. And what I was interested in, that Ukrainian state was a lot more capable than we could expect, and it's very pleasant that we can live in a country where the state was more stress resilient than we could ever expect from our based on our empiric views and concept. It's a puzzle and a challenge, and my intelligence pivots around theoretic issue, which is very important, obviously. It's how the Ukrainian society and Ukrainian state should operate to win the peace after the war, because the victory in war is not a period, it's just another section in political, administrative, economic, cultural, social, you name it, history of the country. And this is exactly where it's important to renew the Ukrainian state during peacetime as a capable state which can implement the policies of modernization on one hand, and to avoid the temptation of authoritarianism and autocracy in which may emerge in its way. Because the country, the state contributing to the development should be strong with the tradition of Maidans and our geopolitical situation, with the borders of European Union, our aspirations to European integration, the development of democratic institutions and practice is imperative, just like economic development. And the experience of the Asian tigers is mostly authoritarian, and Ukrainian political and administrative elites face the task of rebuilding the Ukrainian state. Well, let's maybe talk about the future a little bit later. Well, let me just finish. Because Ukrainian state demonstrated its unexpected resilience, which exceeded any expectations in terms of its performance, and the impulse, the momentum should be kept, should be preserved, and directed into constructive direction. So to say, Mr. Lubomyr, I know that you have presentation. Yeah, if we can put it on the screen, the next slide. Yeah, you have the clicker. Oh, I forgot it. My apologies. So this is a slide which demonstrates everything. Our company, from the very first day of the war, we continued our operation, and we conducted 18 polls in different questions, the psychological markers and social and economic markers, the markers of losses, and something related to veterans movement. And we have a lot of conclusions, opinions to be discussed, but I would like to draw your attention to the fact that I want to agree with Mr. Pavlo. From the very first day of war, Ukraine demonstrated exceptional resilience, and it was really unexpected. There was the flaw existed in the society. Like some part of the population was pro-Russian, for example, and they were staying in these Russian narratives. They were not so active, but they still existed. But starting from the very first day of the war, we witnessed the situation when things turned upside down. I like to play this situation, how everything changed. We see the direction, how, for example, the people evaluated the situation during peacetime. The population was pessimistic. They were saying everything goes wrong. As soon as we get the common enemy, common work to pivot about, to unite around, many things changed, and the social polls, they changed the confidence in country. Well, the confidence is a philosophic category, but the estimate of evaluation of who we are, the self-identification, is the evaluation with regard to the others. Like the estimate was 3.0, we are worse than Europeans, for example, but now the evaluation is 4.6, which is very high index. It's a very high index, high indicator about self-confidence of who we are. So it grew to 6.4 about the feeling of civilian. Well, so the war made us optimists. Well, it made us Ukrainians and very self-confident. It's a paradox, but I think we will continue. There is a lot of material to discuss. I will pass the mic to my colleagues. Good afternoon, all. One one of the chapters of our discussion is the pertinence to the social institutes. We observe a complicated growth of trust in society after the beginning of the war. It's been observed always when the society feels some threat, some insecurity. We documented the growth of trust to the government when COVID-19 pandemic began, and now there is another jump in trust to government institutions, to president. For example, 82% of the population trust the president now. It's close to the indicator which was just upon the elections when President Zelensky came to office, and within the first few months the level of trust to the president is high, and it was getting lower with time. And the same story happened to Volodymyr Zelensky, maybe not as fast as with other presidents. However, now we see that upon the beginning of the war the level of trust grew, just as well as to the other government institutions. However, there are certain differences. For example, less people trust to the parliament, only 40%. They enjoy only 40% trust, and 60% have distrust in them, which is lower than before. Why there is low trust in parliament? Because there is a low level of trust to political parties, which the parliament is associated with mostly. The lowest level of trust is to the courts, and that's an exception. The issue with the courts is the corruption, is the problem in which our society is mired in during the whole period of independence. And even the growth of trust to the government institutions did not influence courts. Only a couple percent growth in trust to the courts, but the majority don't trust the banks, and 66% of population don't trust the banks, for example, and large companies. However, many large companies, they are involved in charity, of support of the Ukrainian army, but still it's a heritage of the past distrust to the large companies. It's still there. Well, I didn't mention the distrust in courts. 72% of population don't trust the courts, and 77% don't trust the political parties. As to the paternalism, in general, more than half of the polled, according to the data of the polls conducted jointly with Democratic Initiatives Fund, they think that the government should provide the option of realization of their civil rights to all the citizens, but not direct their lives. It's only 40% who think about such support. The question was, can the citizens live without support from the government? So 64% of the population say that no, they could not. And this figure is bigger. The war influenced it in its way. People still rely on government's help, on government support, but we have to also mention that the younger is the population, the younger is the respondent, the less they rely on the support of the government. But even among them, more than half rely on such support. As to the expectations from the future, 90% believe in victory. And responding to the question how they see the victory, it's the full, complete ousting of the invaders beyond the borders of 2014, and more than 20% think that the victory should lay fundamentals to the radical changes inside Russia. And the majority of the people think, when they reply to the question about their feelings, they relate it to the joy, to the hope, and they think that our country will be able to overcome all the obstacles. Before the war, it was only 18% of such answers. Now this figure grew over 40%. More than 40% think that we will overcome all the obstacles for the future. Mr. Andriy, can you, if you may add anything? Thank you. Can you please talk closer to the microphone? First of all, I will touch the point not previously discussed. It's the question, is the issue of internal refugees. We had 20 focus discussions with internal refugees and around 50 focus groups from the beginning of the full-scale invasion. So we noticed one great thing. When you start such research somewhere in Dnipro region or Kharkiv region, that they say that the Westerners do not like us. I mean, in the western part of Ukraine, and in the same way in Lviv or Zakarpattia regions, not the regional capitals, but in the province, they say that the Easterners don't like us. For example, it's not like the same message was very strong in both parts. And now that there is this phenomena of internal refugees, they've seen that they're regular people with like hands and legs, and they can be talked to, and this conflict between East and West, it just disappeared. Well, there may be some tension, but we've seen, for example, the way how the internal refugees influence the change of opinion. So it's only 12.8% mentioned that the attitude is negative. And there is a growing trend, which we started observing during coronavirus pandemic, when we asked the question, what's your biggest fear? The first response was for the biggest fear is the death of the closed ones. And when now people are asked, why didn't you live abroad? The most popular answer was their relatives staying in Ukraine. And the legislative restrictions only are observed with 14% of the population. So this trend of caring more about the closer ones than themselves is something that we observed during coronavirus and we observe now. And this is how people get together around their closed ones, their relatives. About the attacks on the infrastructure, we finished just the day before yesterday, we finished another phase of panel when we started preparing the schedules. I'm reading, we couldn't draw the graphs without the power, but we were able to obtain the figures. So 80% said that yes, they are sure that there will be power shutdowns, and 38% said that they were able to get prepared to it. So basically people say that yes, they got prepared in one way or another. So roughly, these missile strikes were not unexpected to anybody. They were expected, and people were getting prepared to them. People were procuring, like 39% procured power banks, 38% bought candles, 34% bought food with long shelf life. So people were ready to that. Even yesterday, we can research the situation. We walk around the street, and there is a line near the shop, for example, where food is being sold, but there is no panic. It's just a line. 50% were saying that they were buying things to go through power shutdowns. 19% said that they were preparing country houses to move to, and 14.5% said that they don't plan anything. So trust to the government, the most interesting thing. I completely support the data provided by our colleagues. The rating of the president is very high. So is it about rating or the trust? So we say 80 or 85 or 75% is the record high. But the discussions with volunteers, what are the volunteers? They are the most active fraction of the population. They contact each other, they communicate in their community, they enjoy high level of trust. And for example, military self-censure. For example, a person who doesn't like something, they talk about those problems somewhere in their kitchens. And when the moderators ask them, like, are you sure you don't have anything? They start telling more about the negative sides of the things. Somebody complains for the customs. For example, like out of 5 trucks of humanitarian aid, customs take 2 trucks to themselves. Someone complains for inadequate behavior of the employees of the customs. So in the most active part of society, for example, they say that there are right volunteers and not right volunteers, without any confirmation of any facts, if somebody was let in Kherson and somebody was not let. So in these groups, if there is any critics, as soon as there is the end of this era of military self-censure, people have more things, more negative things accumulated inside them, and we will get back to our normal quarrel. This is what we're gonna come back to. And the last thing is the military. That there is a thought, that there is an opinion that the military should come to power in future. So there was a question, do you think that the military should govern the state after the victory? And only 9% think that absolutely yes, but almost 60% still did not identify themselves. And for example, if you will give preference to the people with military experience, it's hard to say for 35%, and still don't know more than 50%. For example, if they will vote for a military one, a serviceman, people still don't know. Or about the volunteer, we will question people about the volunteers in the next wave. It's a plus, but it will be an advantage, but it will be not the defining quality, defining characteristic. And I have to mention again that there is no division into West and East. Now the country is more united. There is no such division anymore. And we see it in our research and how Kherson showed themselves during the occupation, as well as other cities. Ukraine became united and ready for challenges. If anybody has any questions, please raise your hand, and I will ask first question myself. Well, the trust to the president or president's rating, is it the same, or is it something? Are those different things? So. Well, there is no political process now, there is no competition of personalities, and the self-censure by Ukrainians and the potential political competitors, they have their self-censure turned on. And in this triangle, like traditional curve of the Ukrainian search for strong hand, where we were looking for somebody, we voted and then removed that government, will Ukrainian keep looking for a strong hand, or will Ukrainians be looking for something else? What do you think? Where are we moving to? Where are we going? If you allow, I will undertake the responsibility to comment on this question first. The trivial thing is that this question is extremely complicated, because if here and now we can measure the president's rating, for example, and it will reflect the reality, because yes, today, even based on our life-saving instinct, yes, we understand that we have to stand united around the leader, about who is commander-in-chief according to the constitution, because now we are facing the aggressor who is intending to, whose intention is genocide. Like Napoleon said, it's better to have one bad commander than two very good. So we're talking about paternalism, this demand of the strong hand. Everything becomes a lot more complicated and multidimensional, because it's not easy. Like the direct question, what do you expect from the state? In my opinion, there is no specific answer to this question, because we have to put it in a context of a social changes, of the traumatic experiences, traumatic social changes which were happening in the end of 80s and the beginning of the 90s. For example, the disappearance of the savings of the significant segment of population when the government did not fulfill its responsibilities. So people accumulated a large level of distrust in the government, which was documented by multitude of parameters, and the expectation that I want to express my interpretation of it. So the state is underperforming, performing its functions in a less efficient way than necessary, and it created the mechanism of high expectations. If we raise the bar, at least some services, some social goods will be provided by the state, and in the same way, the strong hand, it's a dream to have things sorted out in a prompt manner, but when it comes to business, when Ukrainian society faces the necessity to concentrate or consolidate their power in an authoritarian way, it creates the opposite reaction. So I call everybody to avoid such labels. Like many people are inclined to paternalism, authoritarianism. It's a multidimensional phenomena, and the fact that hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of our citizens before the war found shelter as economic migrants in countries of European Union or United States, it demonstrates resilience of our citizens. And in this context, it's important, when my colleague mentioned the high level of distrust in big corporations, it has its roots in the high level of social inequality. So if we look at official statistics, the Gini index of inequality is almost like in Norway. So the level of equality is pretty high in our society. If we look at sociological research, the results of the polls, the analysis of politologists, economists, we see quite different picture, that the level of social and economic inequality seems to be very high in our society. And again, the journalists come to help us, investigative journalists who research the formation of these estates by the corporations, and our citizens do not have enthusiasm and trust in this regard, and other positive feelings. So we have to avoid such straight evaluations, and we need to keep investigating to sort things out and to have the multidimensional understanding of these phenomena. Well, yeah, we have to use the scientific method. I've heard the interesting thought that there is official and unofficial state which expressed itself during crisis situation. It's like it's the same thing with the taxation and the demand for authoritarian leader who will rule the country with iron hand, who will say that they will rule the country in a way that I would like it to see. The problem is that if an authoritarian leader comes in power, he or she does the things in a way that they like it, not how I like it to see. So we see there the usurpers, and the next iteration of the authoritarian leader who does the things in a different way. So there will be another group of people who would say that everything is wrong. The way they're doing it is wrong. If we ask people, do you want to see a powerful leader? Well, nobody wants to see a weak president of the country. Everybody wants to see a powerful president. But when it comes to implementation of the programs, it turns out that they're doing it wrong. They raise taxes, or, for example, we want the taxes down, or they increase the taxes, but we want more social security, social protection. So this is why we don't have authoritarian leaders, and most likely we will not get them. Now, I would like to specify, you were talking about the difference in trust to parliament and president. We have a parliamentary presidential country. Will not this situation lead to the complete lack of trust in parliamentarism as a primary institution in governance of the country? Well, yes, to a certain extent, obviously, there is a contradiction between the existing system of power and low level of trust to the parliament and to the political parties which form the parliament. So due to the crisis results in developments, actually, but the question was about the powerful leader. And replying to the question, if the citizens want a powerful authoritarian leader, what's interesting, we broke this down into monitoring and how do you like the system which envisages the strong leader independently of parliament and elections. Within the last years, there was tactics which was called good. In 2012, people were 80% were replying that yes, this system is good. But however, it seems paradoxical, but now only 68% think this system is good. So it's lower than it was in 2017. However, the number of those who think that democratic system is better, 90% of the population think that democratic system is better. And these are the people who at the same time they respond that the democratic system is good, but at the same time they say that they have the opinion that the strong leader is good too. So they see no contradictions. So they don't want authoritarian strong leader, but strong leader who would provide democracy. So this is why I was always frightened by sociology, because it can unite things that cannot be united, actually. The interesting fact is that we asked the same question during the research of the values. The support of the strong leader, for example, like in Romania, 73% replied yes. And this level is way higher than in Germany, for example. Yeah, you mentioned it right, that the sociology can unite things that cannot be united, but our society is multidimensional, and we have to understand that the other people live in this society with us, with the different opinions, with different values. As to the paternalism, I would like to add that I cannot agree to the full extent that the level of paternalism grew in the country. The easy example is, for example, people getting prepared for the power shutdowns. They don't come to the state. They try to sort this thing out by themselves. And the change in terms of paternalism is starting from 2014. It changed with the beginning of the volunteer movement. It was not a mass story. It was very local for a certain fraction of the population. But let's be honest, now it's 2022. Now we witness the mass engagement of people in the volunteers ranks. Many people went as volunteers into ranks of the army. And the situation we're facing now, it makes us become more resilient. The sociologists know this Schwarz method. There is a number of important things. For example, starting from 2021, two basic values changed. It's traditionality and self-awareness, because traditionality is where government is, under credibility, language and faith, and self-awareness is something that I'm talking about now. So it's an interesting factor, and it's interesting to pay attention to this presentation. Like the vector of values in all categories, it changed year to year. If we see the four components of these values, I will not explain it methodologically, but we've seen withdrawal from paternalism. We become self-confident, and yes, we are forced to become more self-confident because the situation we find ourselves in, it makes us not to lose our spirit. The war makes people stand on their feet, and within the 30 years of independence, within 31 years of independence, the Ukrainians went through a number of evolutions. So that these waves, they started not back in 2004, but from the revolution on grenade. And Ukraine became one of the key factors. The hunger strikes and the revolution on grenade was the first Maidan. And let's remember 2002, Ukraine without Kuchma, and in 2004, 2014, 2022, we witnessed the growth of the society, a layer of population who can take the situation in their hands. And as to the trust to the government and autocracy, Ukrainians want to see not the dictator, but a hetman. Let's recognize it. We were trying to cancel the office of the president, but sociology always shows that there should be one single person who should be to blame. That's true. That's why this level of trust of the president is always a curve. This is the specificity of our mentality. Well, probably the war will change this situation. I have thousands of these figures in my head, I mean in sociological figures, but it's very difficult to forecast who would become a next president. It depends a lot on when the war would be over. Like we can say about rebuilding of the rebuilding the economy of the state, to have a strong leader, to raise funds from the Western partners, and under the pressure of the international partners, it will be some person. So you want to say that Zaporizhzhia siege is the ideal model of governance? Well, we have to understand that the Zaporizhzhia siege is chaotic, and it actually did bad to the state. We're talking about the historic parallels. For example, we can say that we may expect some autocratic strong hand who will allocate the funds. And the society is ready for that because they accepted President Zelensky during the war. Well, the society accepted the leader who shows the leadership characteristics. Yeah, right. And in this situation, we can expect the same. He proved himself as a leader. We have questions in the studio, please. Good afternoon, Olena Subko, Ukrinform. You mentioned that this war made Ukrainians. We became optimists, that we believe in victory, but unfortunately, even now, there is still a large fraction of population who think that what's going on now is the result of work of the West. I've even heard such opinion that Ukraine provoked the war. If it's not Ukraine, the war wouldn't have happened. And if we would not have wanted to become a NATO member, why is it happening? Why do people live here and they don't change their opinion? And how can we convince them that Ukraine did not provoke anybody? Thank you. Yes, please. Please take the microphone. Well, such opinions, they do exist, but as the details of the sociological research shows that such opinions are marginal. The vast majority does not share such opinion, and we have negative attitude to Russia, mostly, and most of the population blame Russia for the beginning of such war. And yes, we have to convince the people like those you mentioned, but if they were not convinced by the circumstances, so why do we even need to convince them? There should be no specific influence of them by the society, because under situation of occupation, such people, yes, they become collaborationists probably, but we cannot change anything in this situation with regard to these people. Yes, please. I would support the words of Mr. Mykhailo. I will show you the graph so you can understand attitude to the countries. So who's to blame for the beginning of the war? Unfortunately, I don't have graphs with me, but the colleagues who can support my words, more than 90% of the population say that it's Russia to blame for the beginning of the war, and only 1 to 2% may say that Ukraine is the one who provoked the war. But we have to also understand that people are also in the stressful situation, and during certain moment they can blame whoever in some certain situation, but generally such moods are marginal. We don't observe any of them. And under the conditions of the war, obviously, it's maybe more than the sociological research shows, because we're facing the phenomena when people who obviously whose opinion contradicts to the opinion of the majority, they avoid expressing their position, their opinion. But maybe this number is a little bit bigger than sociological research show. There is also perception aberration. For example, when you see a very tall person in a subway, you may say that I've seen very tall person who did not fit in the carriage. It's a very small percentage of them, but they are visible. If you see a street fight, you will remember it for a long time. However, the number of perpetrators is little, and you, for example, you can see a high number of divorces and they end up peacefully, but we remember the cases when it goes with a quarrel, court and stuff like that. So we see some marginal cases. When you hear that Russia is an aggressor, that Ukraine is united, we understand it as, we perceive it as the noise. But when we see some aberration, you remember this opinion. For example, like I mentioned, the tall person in a subway, you just remember them because they are something different, and in the same way this opinion is being remembered because it's the specificity of operation of our brains. Another quote in the view of what my colleagues were saying, I've seen a movie about Charlie Manson in America who organized their cult, and they killed the wife of Roman Polanski, famous film director, and he was imprisoned, and there Charles Manson was receiving a lot of mail, so many people wrote a lot of letters to him. I will remind you, convicted for the murder of a pregnant woman. So in the society we can find very exotic opinions, and this is what differs the democratic society from the totalitarian, authoritarian. So people can express their opinions, but the numbers say for themselves. All these opinions are marginal, are exotic, and are within error, statistic error, and if this opinion translates in some actions, it's the law enforcement agencies who should take care of them. The war has many dimensions. How you see in terms of society, European Union declared that they're building society 5.0. Now the industry 5.0 is the society for the people. Ukrainian society is 4.0. It's one of the effort, the national potential, like you mentioned, Polanski and everything. You mentioned that the nation is united, but what's in future? 5 more million get united. Do we have any claims for society 5.0? So who starts? If you allow me, I started talking about the perspectives of the victory. Machiavelli knew back in his days, and his contribution to the political theory is definitive. He declared that the construction of the society is the consequence of our actions, of separate individuals and social groups. It's not some godly arranged order which falls on our heads, but it's something that we built, and we can start talking about the formulas of development and modernization already now. Formulas that Ukrainian government Ukrainian state will offer to the society, and the society may either accept it or refuse it. And this is the discussion we have to start now already, because no strong leader can initiate the program of modernization like that, and the Ukrainian state after the war should implement the process of intellectualization. We have to recognize that unfortunately it's not observed now in the society. We have to do a great job in analysis of the experience of European Union and Asian countries to find our niche based on the global trends on one hand and real distribution of labor and our place in this world order, because these are the realities which are structural and very powerful, and it's difficult to jump over them. There are success stories that we need to study and to think in what way we can incorporate it in our ground. But the key word is thinking, and after thinking we have to proceed to thoughtful actions, and the role of the leader is great in this regard. And for example, wonderful leader Napoleon, who became the emperor and who ended up with the enemy troops coming to Paris, and then Napoleon III had many victories, Paris reconstruction, and then it all ends with the defeat on the Sedan, and we can continue this list. In Ukraine, not so long ago, the public opinion treated Lukashenko, for example, like a strong hand who keeps the directors disciplined, but we see this state machine under individual control. This control may become destructive for society, which is being controlled by this authority, by the authority of this strong leader, and as well as to the neighboring states, and we all feel it, we all endure it. So we have to find a balanced way, which is extremely complicated, but because there are no ready-made formulas, they do not exist, and it should be fulfilled by Ukrainian society, Ukrainian intellectuals, and Ukrainian state. So such a triangle, but the state should be the procurer of such model. And if, for example, if they model it in their head, maybe they were not able, they may not be able to implement it by themselves. If I understand it right, that trust in the future is trust in victory. And what happens after the victory, nobody really imagines what's going to happen after the victory, and it will develop by itself. Again, what's victory? The opinions are different. Yes, there are different formats of victory. Victory is freedom. Our research showed, like, when we were questioning people what's more important, freedom or security, the vast majority said that freedom is more important, and the number of such respondents grew lately. So anyway, any war ends with negotiations. There is Ukrainian position that Ukrainian government will insist upon. And in understanding of Ukrainian society, what will be the victory, how it will be accepted by the society, it's a complicated question. I would like to say about the future. A few weeks ago, I was in a group of moderators who were conducting a strategic session for Ukrainian Consulting Association. The very simple question: what's going to happen to political consulting market after the war? And I will try to project the results to your question. What we got? The forecast was like that: we will have a lot of political players who, among themselves, they will arrange a very complex coordination. This is one aspect. There will be a political force which will derive from existing servants of the people, and there will be a political force growing on the bones of the Party of Regions, the strong economy managers. There was a party of community leaders which proved themselves to be good at any elections, and the parliamentary discussion between them, what's gonna happen is the finding of a new pivot points. The democracy will not disappear, it will not go anywhere, because again, as soon as there is an authoritarian leader, they will be explained that autocracy is bad. And the second aspect is that right upon the victory, the reconstruction will begin based on the most cutting-edge technologies existing in the world for the time being. But the technical technologies, they require the advent of a social technologies. So the cities that are in bad condition now, for example, Mariupol, which almost ceased to exist, there will be new construction in it and new social technologies implemented there. And the story of how these social technologies will be coordinated with our government, this is how economy or how democracy works. Well, you intrigued us more than you explained. I will try to answer this question. Again, it's very complex because forecasting of the future is very difficult, no matter how many figures we operate. When we are asked what will happen, we can say, but it will not always be true. Why? Because we just cannot forecast chaos. The request, the demand for Industry 5.0, no matter how naive this cloud of words looks like now, but this is how Ukraine is imagined in future. We put it as an open question, like name 3 words, like independence, liberty, democratic order, people have to comply with, prosperous, strong, self-aware, and I agree with the words of my colleagues that potential for the development of such society exists because in the destroyed territory there is a necessity to involve the new equipment for rebuilding, for reconstruction. We will not live based on the Soviet era industry. What's interesting, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that there is a very important subject, also sociologists know about that. The most conservative population was in the East. Now East suffered most, was mostly afflicted by the war. They suffer unemployment, and people who will come back there, they will have to face the new reality, the new technologies. And this is probably a ray of hope, because society which endured these sufferings, we're saying that this is how the situation is evolving now, and it transforms the view of the world. And before the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we had a municipal research in Mariupol, and in the regional capitals there were 7 waves of it. I have a power bank presented to me by the mayor of Mariupol, and it's a reminder when they came to us for questioning, for the poll, that there was a completely different opinion of how to transform the conscience of this industrial city. And when we were asking those questions, they were surprising to them. It was about the change of consciousness of the people. They said we would not be able to remove Azovstal, and pro-Russian tuned, like 30% were like cotton, pro-Russian, and another 30% were pro-Ukrainian, and we would not have been able to change this situation, but just changing the city itself, we can change their lives. We can change history. So this is what's changing is the history, the history of the East, because we will not have that East that we used to have previously. Based on the Soviet era industry, it will cease to exist, and we will rebuild something completely different. What's gonna happen, we don't know. Let's first win the war, and then we will talk about last question. Michael Ashura, Newsweek, USA. We see that Ukrainian society is united around the question of victory. Well, we all have to agree Ukraine is a democratic society, United States are a democratic society, and one of the characteristics of the democratic society is when some sharp issue is being discussed, more sharp issues are being found in this process. In America, we keep disputing over different issues. After the victory, what will be these sharp questions? The model of economy, language, allies. Let's answer the question and wrap it up, and we will discuss after we will dispute everything after the victory. Well, as I see, the journalist understands English. All right, some of the questions will be removed.
Our agenda, like language, I guess, church issues, geopolitical orientation, because the overwhelming majority of Ukrainian citizen respondents, according to public opinion polls, are in favor of NATO, European integration, Ukrainian language, and last but not least, or perhaps most importantly, Ukraine's independence. But I think of paramount importance will be the issues of the path of development, whether we are building a welfare state, socially oriented market economy, or leaning towards traditional to this area wild capitalism, whether Ukrainian oligarchs will be tamed by the state while preserving democratic institutions and practices. And of course, the issue of social inequality is extremely acute, and it has to be addressed. Issues of education, beginning from primary education and up to the university education, is also extremely important, and it hasn't been given its due by the Ukrainian government, Ukrainian state. And of course, again, if we are talking about Ukraine's future, innovations, modernization, development, we have to focus on research and development, and these areas have been severely underfunded. And it has to be changed if we want to bring about transformation of Ukrainian society for the better and make it a modern, competitive, innovative nation.
А може я доуточню? Це буде насправді у нас дискусія щодо якихось
We will have discussion about some ideas, or will it be a discussion about the leadership or the people who drive us along these main pathways, because the direction is already set, and the discussion will be who will guide us this way, and either tram or subway or a bus, because no one is going to push us away from the path of NATO integration, the path of language issue and reformation of education sphere, but it will be about the people, the specific people. It will be the subject of discussion. Well, it's not so simple because the devil is in details. And yes, there is a strategic vector, and we understand where we want to get to, but in the same way that we can get to final destination, or either reach final destination or do not reach it, is the same situation as here. We shouldn't put it in either question. We need leaders, we need institutions, we need social movements, we need a lot actually. It's like a recipe for borscht, like that there is sugar beet and water, and that's it. There is a number of recipes for borscht, but the classic option takes a large number of ingredients, and we're talking about the one single dish and talking about the future of the state, like Ukraine as the European state. The element of modernization is very complex, and it has a lot of components itself, and this is not something we have to fear. This recipe is not so expanded, or it's our achievement. We see some pluralism, multidimensionality, and it's good in a regulatory way, and it's better than autocracy, authoritarian order, and all these isms. We see it in the example of our aggressive neighbor who tries to eliminate our nation, but they destroy the future of their own people. I like the metaphor that Ukrainians will choose borscht, and there will be choice between Poltava borscht with beans. And may I add a few words that after the victory, the main problem will be that there will be forces in the society which will try to revert to the social orders which was existing before the war, because government officials of different levels, they will they will try to use our mental habits, and on the other hand, there will be people who will try to use the situation with the to the benefit of modernization. And it's a very interesting point. Yes, please. As to the disputes in the United States, for example, because there is a very complex political system, a lot of disputes, political discussion going on, and so on and so forth. It doesn't look like easy. Every state is a different state. Actually, it's like a different country, and thanks to this discussion, United States became the most powerful country in the world. And if such practice may be implemented in Ukraine, because we have to use this experience, and there is a practice of another country in the world where there is no discussion going on. Yeah, but now they have a biggest crisis they have, and they will spiral down into the crisis. And as to the flaws in the society, we know that we want to have a prosperous, developed country, and then we will have a discussion of what is beautiful, developed, and prosperous country, what's strong, and what's the way, what's the path to this state. For example, the eternal dispute about centralization or decentralization in every regional capital, that there is a conflict between the municipal government and the regional administration and regional council. This is a very complex triangle, and when for example, mayor and head of administration, they say to each other, who are you? I was elected by the people. And another one says, I was appointed by the president. And this is exactly what happens during the discussion of the budget, for example, every year. And another conflict that we will have is a derivative conflict of the allocation of funds that will be incoming. The state wants the funds to be channeled through Kyiv, and the regional governments, they want to get the funds directly. And another interesting and very complicated process will be the clearing of power, when all the corrupted officials will go through this clearing process, but it won't look beautiful. We will witness the corruption scandal like every 3 days, and there will be anti-corruption investigations ordered by one corruptionist against the other one, but this is the way the system will become more transparent, but there will be a lot of quarrel. There may be disputes of how the state should spend the money, because before the 24th of February, the democratically elected power was spending money for the roads, for the schools, but this is what the democratic government should do. But now there is an understanding that, yeah, well, good roads is good, but actually we need weapons. And there will be very intense discussion around the freedom. Yes, we want all freedom, but at the same time, we want social protection at the same time. And that the liberty and social protection are to a certain extent self-exclusive. Well, there will be a lot of, sometimes it's difficult to comprehend. There will be a lot of regional disputes. For example, if there should be a children's playground on this piece of land or the parking lot, but all these conflicts should result in improvement of life. Like in the United States, all the conflicts going on, they result in some improvements. And Mr. Lubomyr, ultimately, yes, I support my colleagues. Really, we will see the disappearing of the Russia issues in our agenda, because Russia declares the story of itself by itself. Actually, this story will not have any continuation. the story that they used previously. What's in future for us, I don't see anything bad in the disputes, because this is a characteristic of the democratic society, and it's an element of political development, social development. People like it, and the political points are being gained this way. And I'm not saying that there are many political forces, but the political show is one of the key instruments for coming to power. But thanks to the media and now the fast media, we lose the television, but there is TikTok immersion, for example. We will see politicians in Instagram and TikTok. Yeah, that's what we're witnessing now already. It will be a new trend, but what's in future for us? I would like to add, and the Institute of Sociology supports this opinion, we will see another lines of division in the after-war society, the society traumatized by war, and we will have some conditional contradictions between those who went abroad and who stayed, who volunteered and who did not, who was in the front line and who was not. And those are the characteristics which will be ascribed to the society coming from the war period. After the war, the renewal of the society and it will be a characteristic of how to exit this political crisis, psychological crisis. We will have a layer of malcontents who may be transformed into a political force, but we remember the experience of the Germany in 1930s, like how the force of veterans can be transformed into something else. The veterans who were not taken care of by the state. This is, and we know what it can result in. So these division lines, they will be more related to the traumas of war that we will feel after the victory, which we don't experience yet. For example, the victory is the return to the borders of 1991. But the period between the prosperous country and the country after the victory, no one knows what will happen. No one knows what will be the wounds we will have to mend. It's very difficult to answer this question for the time being. For what I understand, our next discussion will be about the work with psychologists. It's one of the important components of the war, because it's the war of psychologists. For the time being, we finish our discussion about sociology. Joining us were Lubomyr Mysiv, who summarized our discussion, Mykhailo Mishchenko, Deputy Director of the Razumkov Center Sociological Service, Andriy Eremenko, founder of the research company Active Group, and Pavlo Fedorchenko-Kutuev, Doctor of Sociological Sciences, Professor, Head of the Sociology Department at Igor Sikorsky Kyiv Polytechnic Institute. See you. Thank you.